And joining us now to discuss the latest in the D.C. shooting is attorney and political strategist Gerard Filitti. Good morning, Gerard.
Good point.
Now, with the suspect being an Afghan asylum seeker vetted previously by the CIA, how might this expose flaws in our immigration screening process from a national security perspective?
This clearly exposes flaws because while this individual was screened back in the early 2010s when he was working allegedly with the CIA and with American forces in Afghanistan, that's a different standard of screening than when you have someone coming into the United States to be your neighbor, especially when you're looking at countries like Afghanistan where identity cards and even names are not commonly held throughout one's lifetime, and it's harder to identify individuals. Screening is all that much more key. So what this tragic incident identifies is the need to do better and more comprehensive screening because we simply don't have that assurance that everyone who came into the United States in the last 10 years belongs here.
Now, Trump's pause on migration from certain countries is now permanent. Do you see the shooting accelerating conservative calls for even tougher border reforms?
It does. I think the issue here, as was said in the previous segment in the lead up, is that we do need to know who came into this country before we can start screening additional arrivals. That we have such a backlog of immigrants who came here under different programs in the Biden years and even in the Obama years, that we need to go back and make sure that they are safe to be in American society, that they don't pose a danger to our national security. And we can't do that while devoting even more resources to bringing in or helping additional people come into the country. So this will push for more of a pause on immigration.
And we are seeing the feds re-examining green cards from 19 high-risk nations. Could this bipartisan scrutiny help rebuild public trust in how we handle refugee vetting?
It can, and I think it likely will, but we need to get through the noise of activists saying that this is somehow a hatred of immigrants. It's not. This is a national security concern, first and foremost, and members of Congress on both sides of the aisle see that. So that we need to restore public credibility in the government's ability to keep us safe, and this is a very basic way to do that.
Now, Attorney General Pam Bondi vows justice for the fallen Guard member, Sarah Beckstrom. How does the death penalty in cases like this align with conservative views on crime and deterrence?
Well, the death penalty aligns with many people's views on crime and deterrence. When you take a life, you forfeit the right to live, especially when you do so in a heinous and despicable manner, intentionally targeting individuals for murder. It serves as a deterrent and as a message to others that if you attempt these crimes, you will be punished severely. And there is no punishment more severe than the death penalty.
Now, as this investigation links the suspect's Washington state home to the D.C. attack, could this coast-to-coast probe impact arguments for more federal resources on domestic threats?
It certainly can, and it should, because when you have, we've seen multiple attacks in the last few years that have been traced not just to the actors that committed them, but to networks, often extremist networks, both in the United States and overseas. And we quite frankly need those intelligence assets to determine how these people became radicalized, what induced them to commit these acts of violence, and whether there are any other people in the United States that pose a risk to our national security. That needs government resources and ones that should be prioritized.
And an analyst I spoke to earlier in the show suggested that there also needs to be more pushback on big tech companies and their monitoring of terrorist murmurings. But is there anything more that you think in terms of policy from Congress that you think could help address these kinds of crimes?
In terms of policy from Congress, we really need the tools by the government to be able to look at people who come to this country. This is not just a civil rights issue within the United States, but this is a national security issue. So ultimately, the tools that Congress can provide the administration is clarity and authority on the migration and on the revocation of visas and on the revocation of status. So it should not be an issue that's litigated in the courts all the time, as has been in the last year, but there should be clarity from Congress that empowers the White House to take decisive action.
And as this spotlights a very intense issue here in the U.S., political violence, but also terrorism and terrorist threats and migration, so many different issues. Is there anything that you think is missing from this public debate and public opinion on this?
Education, K-12 especially. I think too often we've seen indoctrination within the classrooms that take people in a more radical direction, but we fail to see basic education on America's history and the threat that extremism poses. For example, very few people today who were not born before September 11, 2001 understand the severity of that type of extremist threat. On the other hand, they understand that there's this kind of kumbaya approach to bringing in all people. So we need to have a better emphasis in education on de-radicalization and teaching proper history.
And from your perspective on the ground, for folks out there who are concerned, don't know what they could possibly do to help out, what do you think an average person out there can do?
Well, the same message that we always hear from the government: when you see something, say something. If there's something suspicious that sticks out, especially when people are saying threatening things, anti-government rhetoric, or threatening violence, say something. Alert law enforcement. Everyone has that power, and being alert and vigilant is always important.
Well, thank you so much for your insights this morning. Gerard Filitti, good to speak with you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.